Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Rockville and Gaithersburg, and really delighted to be kibitzing with Kagan with my special guest, Charlie Scott. Charlie has been Metro's lobbyist since 2007 and also has a background in technology. I'm looking forward to talking with him today about how he's weathering the pandemic and more. Charlie, thank you so much for being with me today.
Senator, thank you for having me.
Of course. So where to start, right? Metro has certainly been among the most affected institutions by COVID. Talk to me about how WMATA is getting through it and what the biggest challenges are.
Yes, so definitely transit across the country has been deeply impacted by COVID, Metro included. Our first focus is on safety. So that includes both the safety of the riding public as well as the safety of our own employees. So we had a pandemic task force stood up, started meeting as soon as we knew that this was a potential coming to our country, and started putting in place protocols. So we started with limiting service, putting our employees on a schedule to limit their exposure to each other and also limit exposure between our employees and the public. So on our bus system, just like right on here in the county, right now it's still rear door boarding, so no fare collection on bus. And then on the rail system also, it's required masks everywhere. And as you can imagine, with travel demand so low right now, we really have a huge drop in ridership on rail as well as on bus. But we're doing everything we can to increase cleaning, increase sanitation, bus and rail, to try to make it as safe as possible for everyone who needs to use transit.
Right. So people are nervous about traveling in general. Air travel at BWI is way, way down.
Of course.
I've seen Metro's ads on TV reassuring folks and emphasizing the cleaning process. Is that bringing people back? Is ridership starting to have an uptick again? And what's
very slowly. So on bus, and our bus customers are often doing the more essential jobs out there in the region. So our bus ridership is down over 50%, and our rail ridership is still down about 87%, which is just a dramatic drop in ridership. Right. Rail ridership, of course, is more geared towards often the office workers who have more options to be doing Zoom sessions like we're doing right now. So,
exactly.
So our rail ridership has really been hit by this as well.
Right. And are there projections about what things might look like after the pandemic, whenever that might be?
Well, it's hard to project. Our board passed a budget a few months ago projecting that ridership would begin to recover by the end of the summer. Obviously, we're not there. The pandemic isn't what we had envisioned, and our status in the pandemic is not what we had envisioned even just a few months ago. So right now we're trying to readjust. And of course, financially, we also need to readjust because fare revenues drive a good portion of our budget.
Right.
And without the revenue to sustain the operations, and right now without the knowing what Congress is going to do, our board is really has a predicament to try to figure out how do we solve our budget for the rest of the fiscal year.
There are so many unknowns. Now, a couple of years ago, the Maryland General Assembly passed some guaranteed funding going out several years, and Virginia did the same, and so did DC. The federal government has always lagged, even though a large portion of ridership has always been federal government employees. Can you talk about that for a little bit, and then talk about, depending on who's in the White House and who's running Congress, what that might look like?
Yes, so thank you to you and your fellow colleagues in Annapolis. The dedicated funding that we have now from Maryland, DC, and Virginia is absolutely critical for the capital maintenance, getting our system back to a state of good repair. And that is allowing us to plan financially for the capital upgrades that we need for an aging system. And of course, it's hard to think of Metro as being a system that will be approaching 50 years old, but that's where we are. So And everything does, just like your home or whatever else, everything requires maintenance. And
Right.
so those funds are dedicated strictly to maintaining the system. The federal funding, we did have federal funding authorized over 10 years ago. So far, that funding has continued even without the authorization. But one of our top priorities in Congress is to have the federal funding also reauthorized going forward.
Right. Well, I don't want to make this partisan, but Joe Biden is a big train rider. So one might hope and expect that he would understand and support infrastructure and funding for local transit systems. Let's pivot. What do you like best and least about your job? What's the hardest part? And is there a fun part either now or ever representing Metro?
Well, it's hard to call the current environment fun, but one thing that is constant in my job is that there's always something new challenging me and challenging all of us at Metro. So whether it's a pandemic that none of us could foresee or other issues that are coming up that impact transit. Outside of the pandemic issues that we're dealing with, right now we're also have a renewed focus on transit equity. I think the Black Lives Matter movement and other focus on equity communities has put a new focus on how do we make sure that our transit service is provided in an equitable manner across the region. So there's always something new to be working on, often driven by the issues of the day.
Say a little more about transit equity. Is it something that's being discussed and explored, or have there been changes yet?
So it's a framework that we are looking at in terms of the service that we provide, looking even as we get into the unfortunate need to potentially cut service as a result of our budget shortfalls, making sure that the service levels that we are providing are focused on the communities who are most dependent upon transit. So often that will be lower income communities, communities that don't have the same level of car ownership,
Right.
and making sure that those communities, even if they don't have as much of a voice in the political world, that they still have representation and service being delivered by Metro.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Do you collaborate with your peers in subway and bus systems around the country? Are there best practices or tips that you all are sharing, or is it kind of isolated?
No, absolutely. I mean, whether it's on a day-to-day operations basis, we have professionals who speak with our colleagues on the bus system, rail system. Mr. Wiedefeld is co-chairing the task force of the American Public Transportation Association, addressing how does transit respond to the pandemic. So definitely we look at best practices. We try to offer best practices as well, and definitely looking at how other transit agencies are responding to this issue as well as other issues. It's definitely something that we like to do to keep up with others in the industry.
Are there other metro systems that you especially admire that you've traveled on and been impressed by? Anything you've learned?
Anything I've learned? Well, years ago, I got to visit Moscow. And I think that system, different type of government, obviously, but they make the trains run on time. And so that was one great thing about having that level of maybe somewhat authoritarian government, but they could make things happen. The other thing I loved about that system also was the amount of art in the system.
Nice.
And the belief that from decades ago that public art in the communist country should be with the people. So that was kind of an interesting thing that you would see elaborate artwork within the stations as well. I think St. Petersburg as well. So
St. Petersburg is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. I was lucky to go there for the first free elections to their legislature, to the Duma, in December of 1995. It was freezing cold, but it was beautiful and really interesting to be in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Speaking of public art, why don't you just say a little bit more about what WMATA does, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. I remember when the Penguins were first installed in Silver Spring, outside of the Silver Spring station. Why don't you tell us how many installations there are, and Is that an area that might need to be cut with budget realities, or how does that go?
So most of our art, so we have 91 stations. I honestly don't know how many of them have art, but I think most of them do. And most of the art is actually donated to Metro. So we don't actually have a budget. We have staff who work on the program, but we don't have a budget to go out and procure the art. So
I did not know that. That's great.
often it's part of the construction. So the Silver Line stations, for instance, that are being constructed, there's a small part of that budget, I think, dedicated to art. So you'll see it sometimes as stations are added to the system. But on an ongoing basis, we don't have a budget to procure new art. So
Right.
that means at least it won't be cut.
Yeah, that's silver lining, I suppose.
Yeah, not much of a silver lining, but.
No, not so much. So one more question, and then we'll pivot to the Fast Five question.
Sure.
Talk about, if you would, there's so many people who have either never been on Metro or who are nervous about it, either now or just. Can you talk about what gets people, how you try to lure people to take mass transit? Why should they not be nervous about it? And how can we increase ridership?
Well, definitely, I think as people get back slightly to their normal lives, I think, I rode Metro just last week for a personal errand because I'm working from home, but everyone I saw in the system was wearing a mask. So that felt encouraging. I think the cleaning protocols that we're taking made me feel more comfortable as a rider, knowing exactly what's going on, sometimes behind the scenes. So I think knowing all that and the comfort that if you feel like you're crowded on a train, hop off, wait, get on the next one. I know you're somewhat giving up some control when you choose to not drive your car and to choose to ride transit. But I think knowing and planning to have options for making that transit trip is a good way to go forward.
Make a plan to vote, make a plan when you're riding Metro.
Exactly.
Well, I want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Senator Brian Feldman, Delegate Mark Corman, Delegate Eric Barron are some of the key leaders, and certainly as the senator who represents a chunk of the red line, I'm always proud to stand up for Metro's needs and to partner with you personally, because you do such a great job, but the whole system needs our advocacy. So thank you for all that you do. And so now we shift to the Fast Five, as I call it. 5 quick questions. If you could make a documentary on any topic, what would it be?
Wow. Well, I'm a bit of a transit geek, so I think it would be interesting to look at more transit systems and just how they have impacted the communities where they have been built and what has occurred from an economic development to just really making communities whole communities when they are when transit is brought to those communities and made an effective part of the social fabric.
Nice. What do you miss most during COVID?
What do I miss most? So my daughter is a senior in high school. So now we're going through the college application and college search process.
Right.
And I think one of the most challenging things has been not being able to visit the colleges. So she's making potentially a life-altering decision without the same benefit that most generations of high school seniors, aspiring college students have had. So
Right.
sort of putting myself in her shoes, it's tough.
It's really tough. I feel terrible for the young people. I got to make a pitch for Vassar, my alma mater. So we can put that offline. In these hard and stressful times, what makes you laugh?
That's a tough one. I think sometimes you just have to scroll through the social media and look for the funny snippets, not the political ones. And whether it's someone, just look for the more funny moments in life and try to ignore everything else going on just for a moment and try to have fun a little bit.
I like it. I like it. So my chief of staff came up with this one. I like this. If you had the choice to travel to 5 cities for a month or spend the whole month in one city, which would you choose and where would you go?
Oh, wow. I would definitely
Right?
choose five cities,
Uh-huh.
because I like the getting to know different cultures.
Mhm.
And I think you would get to see a lot more that way. So I would probably choose one I visited, want to go back to, is Copenhagen. I
Yes.
think it's a just fascinating city, interesting people. Um, oh, wow, 5 different locations.
You don't have to name 5, but Scandinavia or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Nice.
Um,
Okay.
and I would probably try to do, all 5 different continents if I had the, since
Wow.
I don't have, there was no budget to this, right? So
That's right.
if I
That's
could go
right. I
anywhere,
love
I would
that.
definitely pick, an interesting city in 5 different continents.
Very cool. I like that. So the last question that I ask folks is, what is your secret superpower? What skill do you have that most folks don't have?
Secrets. Oh, wow. Um, so I also have a son. He's off to college now, so not being impacted by the pandemic the same way. But when he was in high school, he was an active Boy Scout, and I got to have the pleasure of being the assistant scoutmaster, and teenagers, boys or girls, are very energetic. So my superpower, I think, is that whenever they did an adventure, hiking, kayaking, backpacking, I could always keep up with the
Nice.
teenagers. So
Nice.
uh, it's maybe not a superpower, but it's probably one that's diminishing as I get older. But for now, it
Yeah.
was great to be able to keep up with a bunch of teenagers.
It's impressive as we are no longer as young as we used to be. So good
True,
for you.
quite true.
Well, Charlie Scott from the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, thank you for what you do, and thank you for taking a brief break to have this conversation, this little kibitz. I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing you in person before too long.
Absolutely, Sandra. Stay safe and thank you.
Take care, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.